Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Community Enrichment Project's 2021 Summer Speaker Series livestream. I'm Zakiya Johnson, an intern in the CEP's Digital Media Internship Program, and I'll be your host for today. Joining me is our co-host, Kayla.
Hi, my name is Kayla Williams, and I am an intern at the CEP's Digital Media Internship Program. I'll be your co-host for today, and I'm excited to hear from our panel and share this moment with our audience. Today, we're discussing journalism and how to use your platform as a journalist to speak on important issues that affect our communities. We have a few special guests here with us today to enlighten us on their own experiences in the industry.
Joining us for this dialogue is Kristine Pashin, the founder, co-president, and editor-in-chief of the Journals of Justice. She uses her platform as a journalist to amplify the voices of the youth by allowing them to share themselves with the world through art or writing through the Journals of Justice. Next, we are joined by Ishaan Barrett, the executive student director of Maret High School's InLight magazine. He is currently a senior at the school and has been recognized for his work as a student director by the Princeton Prize in Race Relations. Last, but certainly not least, we are also joined by Sam P.K. Collins, a staff writer for the Washington Informer. He has more than a decade of experience of being a journalist, columnist, and organizer. He covers education, police brutality, politics, and other aspects of the diasporic Black experience.
I want to thank each and all of our guests and audience for tuning in with us today. To begin our discussion today, I want to ask each of our guests about the start of their careers. I'm wondering what made all of you pursue your career in journalism.
So I started journalism in sophomore year in high school. I was actually quite surprised because I've never actually had an actual journalism class or journalism experience before in middle school or early high school. So I think I just took a jump and decided to take the class. And my school is especially focused on like social justice and just community engagement. So after taking the class for a year, like second semester sophomore year, I was thinking, well, how do I take this further? So I guess that's how the Journals of Justice was born, and that's how I'm interested in more like the social justice side of journalism and just making sure everyone's involved and everyone's voices are heard.
Thank you. Do we have anybody to go next?
I started journalism in the 8th grade. It was actually my father who saw my penchant for writing, who encouraged me to join the school newspaper. At the time, I was more interested in computers, but once I started pursuing journalism and I took my writing more seriously, I really got into it. My high school didn't have a school newspaper, so I joined what was called Young DC at the time. But my journalism really took off in college when I founded a magazine for the multicultural community. And then from there, I really got immersed in politics and issues that were related to Black people and people of African descent.
If I might ask really quickly, what was the name of your magazine that you started in college?
The magazine was called Ace Magazine. It's still in existence. The students at GW have done a really good job of really maintaining that legacy. I don't really like calling it my magazine because it came out of a newsletter that was called the Black Ace. But at the time, I really made it because it was more so out of anger with the fact that one of my peers didn't want to interview with me for the magazine or the newsletter because they didn't look at it as a proper publication, like say the on-campus school newspaper. So, that really inspired me to make it a magazine and, make it stand among other magazines or just as a source of news for the community.
So you used it as determination?
Sorry, say that again?
You use it as determination?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, because at the time that was like the Obama era, around the time Obama was running against Hillary Clinton and later John McCain. I was trying to get her opinion as an Afro-Latina, and she really just dogged me out. She said, well, you're not the GW Hatchet. I don't feel like writing anything about that. It's not going to get much traction. And I was angry at first, but I just used it as inspiration,
Yeah, so I think I got my start in kind of journalism and social justice work at the end of ninth grade. I think, our school just didn't really have a publication like InLight to really kind of talk about issues that were affecting our community. And I saw that kind of at the end of my ninth grade year when I looked at other schools who were kind of embarking on their own journey with social justice work at their school. So kind of my biggest kind of question when, I was spending time during my ninth grade summer was like, how can I bring the same kind of determination and focus on issues of social justice and race relations to like a private school that doesn't really have the same amount of kind of student-based focus on this type of work. So I kind of started Maret's version of InLight magazine in the 10th grade, and then I signed on as the student director of our regional nonprofit InLight magazine in March, kind of right when we entered the pandemic. So it was kind of a more rapid fire sprint from going, from a smaller school-based publication to kind of a more regional focus. But I think it was a really kind of eye-opening experience, kind of taking, the smaller nuances of running a school publication and trying to figure out how to do that in the DMV. Yeah, it was a process, but
I really, really love that. It spurred a thought in my head of how I went to private schools for half of my life, and they're different from like public and charter schools and what they let you do and the clubs and things that they make available. So it was really nice to hear you think of we need our own magazine or newspaper in a private school, since it's a different perspective in private schools from how we look at like the world. So that was really neat. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, like Maret, I mean, we have a newspaper, but when I was considering starting InLight, I didn't want it to be part of that newspaper because it's about news, and what we're talking about is like, for InLight at least, what I wanted to do was talk about storytelling and personal experiences. So it was, Maret was very receptive to it, but it was really just kind of finding the niche for it was the challenge. But exactly.
I'm really glad you're able to make that a thing. That's really cool. And speaking on that, the next question is, how do you stay true to your mission of using your platform to raise awareness of issues in your own community or community/issues you advocate for?
Well, I think the biggest thing is we do handle a lot of sensitive topics, and I think part of it is making sure that we have a wide base of writers and also contributors and just people who are willing to share their stories. Because being able to raise awareness of the important issues in our society only through one perspective kind of goes against kind of our purpose of being able to cover advocacy and activism and just social justice with great breadth. And at the JUJ, like, our mission is to educate youth on these topics of social justice. And part of that means learning how to write about these things. And then the other part is learning how to like also bring your work out into the public, I guess, and present it in a way that shows you as someone who's knowledgeable and knows what they're talking about. And regarding the staying true part, I know that sometimes, like, when dealing with these topics, it gets a bit tough because we are dealing with a lot of personal experiences. But also, I think the main thing that I think when it comes to that is just making sure that new voices are heard. Because if you're the loudest one in the room always, then you might need to take a step back and hear others. So being able to raise awareness is about learning your role in this, and then also being able to empower others to raise awareness as well.
Definitely, in terms of just staying true to the mission, oftentimes I think to myself that I really don't have a choice, just given the fact that in working for a community newspaper, you are of the community and you're living in the community. So when you're writing, you're living among the people who are going to read what you're writing. So it's your mission to stay attuned to what's happening and what are their concerns, and just looking at that in the greater context of what's happening around the world. Oftentimes, the issue for me is balancing their priorities with my priorities as a journalist to tell the whole story, even the parts that might not be so favorable to them. That's been an issue I've been grappling with over the last few years in my profession. But in terms of staying true to the mission, that comes very easy, especially when you think about the legacy of the Black press, the North Star, Frederick Douglass, John B. Russwurm, Ada B. Wells, and even, to this day, you have April Ryan, a White House correspondent. You have Dorothy Gilliam. She worked in the Black press, and then later on, she went to the Washington Post. And you have Black reporters now who are in the mainstream, so-called, as well as not in the mainstream, but more independent. I just think that as a Black journalist, we are often beholden, it's just in our DNA and in our experience that's passed generationally. We are beholden to our audience and to what's happening, around us. So it's sort of like you have no choice.
Yeah, so I definitely kind of want to echo what Kristine and Sam said, kind of about an obligation to your audience, but also kind of a broader, duty to share a diverse, range of voices in the work that you do. That's definitely especially true for InLight, which really, again, kind of thrives on kind of personal experiences in order to bridge the gap between communities that are, very different. Like one person can have a very different lived experience from one of our authors, but when we decide to reach out to people who have unique experiences and ask them like, hey, would you be interested in sharing this? Can I talk to you about this? It creates an environment where like we kind of create a culture of dialogue where we're talking about issues that affect not only one community, but really kind of a whole network of communities that are part of the same kind of fabric of the social construct of the issues that we discuss. And I think one of the biggest kind of points that we always try and pull hard on is to stay informed. Like the world moves at a kind of an extraordinarily quick pace. It's kind of astonishing, especially like, with the pandemic, there's something new every day to keep track of. And one of the biggest things that I try to kind of push forward in our work is staying informed about issues that are affecting our community and being kind of timely and respectful about those in order to kind of find the right balance between kind of your obligation as a journalist and your obligation as a storyteller to share experiences that might not be the most pleasant, but also build a culture of kind of ethical understanding where you're not using stories to kind of amplify one side of a very complex issue, but you're using it to share maybe voices that aren't routinely heard in these topics in order to, again, kind of build connections between communities. So I think that's the biggest point, in addition to the wonderful things that were already said, that I would kind of add to making sure that, we keep sharing diverse voices and bring awareness to issues within communities, big and small.
I wanted to thank you all. I got a little bit of kind of feeling of intersectionality in there because you all have common ground of your own different experiences, but you all come to that one main topic of it's our obligation to the people. It's our obligation to get these stories out, let them be heard so people can be aware of them. And also, I believe, Sam, you mentioned how like it's in us to do it. Like we'd be doing ourselves a disjustice if we didn't make sure people are aware of these things, actually help get the information out there so people can know about it, know what we stand for as a people, as a person, as a community, as an individual. So I really appreciate that. And it kind of feels like it makes me want to go into the next question of, was there any major events that happened in your lives or something you viewed in others' lives to help you decide what specific issues you wanted to focus on, and what specific issue did you feel was your like go-to goal that you wanted to first put out and knew you wanted to advocate for your community or communities?
For me specifically, I mean, the Journals of Justice is very much a COVID-19 journalism project. And I think something important that I learned was, it was like March 2020, and I was like thinking, what can I do to help my community? Because my school is very service focused, and we have like a lot of service like hours that we have to do. But like I was thinking, like everyone views it as really hard to like commit yourself to community engagement. But I also think that being able to look at it differently, like not just think of it as like I don't like the word service. I think community engagement is a better term for it. But just making sure to kind of commit yourself to these processes and making sure that you help your community. And anyway, just community engagement shouldn't be an arduous process. And making it seem like service or making it seem like hard is kind of, it attaches a negative mindset to the good we want to make in the world. I think with COVID-19, like being able to realize that as long as you have a good intent and you want to make a good impact, that's important. Even if it's something like writing a piece on an important issue in the community, or just talking to people that are knowledgeable about this, or just encouraging others to inform themselves. It's important, even the smallest things, because in general, those are like the building blocks of the bigger change and movements that we want to see move forward, and just that would better our society.
Thank you so much for that answer. It's real cool hearing the younger panelists speak about their experiences, and I'm just really happy to see journalism take a different shape in these days and times with technology. Just seeing information pass through faster and seeing it take a different shape. Just outside of the conventions of what we thought was so-called proper journalism. In answering your question, I would say for me, it was a process. I think my African consciousness was pretty much the foundation for why I do what I do as a journalist. My parents immigrated from Liberia in the 1980s, and I was born not too long after. And part of balancing my Liberian identity with my identity here in the States was just understanding that Africans across the diaspora, whether you identify as African American, Liberian, Ghanaian, Brazilian, we all come from Africa, and Liberia has a special case, just given the fact that it was founded, with the help of the United States. Even though I got some thoughts about that, it was founded by African Americans who wanted to return to Africa, who felt they didn't have any life here. This was like 1847. Enslavement was still a thing, and they just wanted to go back home pretty much. So with that in my heart and the lessons that I learned throughout the years, just about Malcolm X and about how he wanted to unite Africans across the world toward the end of his life, learning about Marcus Garvey, learning about how media was used to promote African unity and promote more of a nationalism that was the antithesis of integration back then. It just really compelled me to be more conscious about what I was writing and why I was writing it. I'm of the belief that when you're writing as a journalist, they say objectivity is like the cornerstone of the profession, but by nature we are not really objective, which is why you do your best to include different viewpoints. But every journalist brings with them a set of beliefs and a mind frame, which is why, during the 1700s, 1800s or so, you had yellow journalism, or you had major publications referring to our Black leaders in derogatory names, and because those publications, even though they talked about objectivity, they had a certain bias, So in just wrapping up my long answer, I would say like a lot of events over the years, in addition to what I learned, really compelled me, shape my identity as a journalist, and, really made me focus on helping my community, and I would even speak about what's been happening over the last 7 years, between Mike Brown, events in Baltimore, Texas, St. Louis, all over the country, just really being on the ground and giving people who are reading a real sense of what people are feeling about police brutality. That has been my goal, and I really think that oftentimes, Black stories need to be told by Black people.
Yeah, so I think for me, at least, it might have been a combination of two events. So InLight started at Maret in 2019. So we kind of released our inaugural edition in the first semester, which was it was amazing to kind of be able to put that out there for the first time. But it was also kind of a year that I remember kind of, that was, the big start. The same year, I also was lucky enough to head over to SDLC, which some of you might know is this kind of student diversity leadership conference, which is majority people of color, and that is run by the kind of National Association of Independent Schools. And that experience, just being kind of in an environment where that's so drastically different from the kind of PWI environment of a private school, it kind of shakes you to your bones. Like, you realize that there are people who care about the same exact things that you care about, that are from the same places that you're from, that care about, that have the same kind of concerns about the school that you go to, that you do. I've been at Maret for almost 13 years now, and it's definitely my home, but it's also, a place that I always kind of seek to improve, to leave a lasting impression on, and to kind of leave, better and more open to change and possibility when I leave. But that was a big moment when I realized that there was like a group of people behind the idea that every school can be cognizant of race relations and social justice, even in a kind of small high school of 350 people. Then kind of in the summer, I mean, on June 26th, I remember pretty vividly the kind of attack on the kind of Indian palace. Baljit Singh, and his family, their restaurant was ransacked with just kind of very very xenophobic remarks. It was Trump administration was kind of putting out a bunch of really kind of toxic ideas about the immigrant experience, and I think being a family from immigrants, it was a big blow, and it kind of, I felt it personally, because it was, an Indian restaurant, and my mom's from India, my family, I'm, from a mixed family, but that definitely left a lasting impression about the kind of ongoing kind of persistence of intolerance. Like, that was really kind of something that I woke up to in that moment. Like, this isn't just rhetoric anymore that I'm frustrated about. This is like people who are inspired by this toxic rhetoric to do terrible things. So that kind of ignited my, passion for doing even more about kind of social justice and not just like cultural tolerancy, but like cultural acceptance and dialogue and appreciation above all else. And that, I think, kind of took itself in its own direction in 2020 and this year as well, especially with the pandemic. We just decided to focus on new things and do even more. Like, we released 2 editions this year instead of 1. Like, that was kind of a big starting moment for us when we realized that, like, these stories do need to be told. Like, we have an obligation to not only share experiences, but like break down walls of intolerancy. Like, that's, our biggest mission now, I guess, more so than just sharing stories, but kind of forcing people to be uncomfortable with how they've been complacent in a lot of these issues of just, hatred. But yeah, it was multiple events, but really it came out of kind of an obligation to do something about them, really.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you all because I love to hear that the reason you started this is also kind of from your own personal experiences and you seeing life. So it wasn't just like you just speaking on something you can't connect to. You guys can really connect to everything you decided to start up and talk about. So it means more, and it can affect people more because they feel like, oh, this person went through it as well. They're more comfortable to talk about it with you or let you talk about it or hear their stories or share it because they feel that they're not alone and it's someone else who has went through something that they feel so like deeply about and want to help. So I really appreciate all of like, it's like more of a candid reason to start up something positive that I really appreciate.
And then also, just to piggyback off of what Kayla said, even outside of the people who are affected by these problems, there are also people who don't know about these problems. You guys are bringing a lot of light to it. So it's just amazing work that you guys all do. And then another thing, all 3 of you guys had in common that you just like felt the need to go and put this work out there simply because people need to hear about these issues and people need to do something. And, you can't just sit around. You don't feel right just sitting around and letting things happen without doing anything. And I really respect that. But at the same time, that brings me to my next question, which is, while I do find it important to use one's platform for social change, I also understand how mentally draining it can be to constantly report on issues that hurt us. So how do you all keep positive about your work and have a healthy mindset?
I mean, to start off, from what I'm hearing, like all of this amazing discussion, I think dialogue is really important, because having people and having support to talk through these issues, like knowing you're not alone, is a big part of why it's really important to empower others in the movement alongside yourself. And then that kind of brings me to a quote I really like. It's that advocacy is a marathon and not a sprint. So obviously, as we have seen, it takes years, sometimes even centuries, to make change, but being able to commit yourself to the process and continue doing it alongside others, but also recognizing that taking care of yourself is also part of one of the radical acts of empowerment you can do for others and yourself as like a team. I think that's really important to recognize. And I think particularly in my experience, when trying to combat apathetic journalism, we often tend to put a piece of ourselves, I guess, into the actual writing that we do. And being able to understand like where you are within your own writing, I guess like understand how you're feeling with what you're putting out, and understanding where do I need to sit down and take care of myself so I can continue doing this is really important. And just doing this with others, and just understanding yourself that way, gives you the ability to move forward and actually make the positive change you want and make it for a long time.
Very good question, and I would say it's a very important one, just because of the nature of the industry. You know, just really having to be accessible at all times and having to keep a pulse on what's going on. I would say for me, humility has been my biggest resource. You know, just really understanding that I'm human. There's only one of me. It's you know, I can only do my part. And that's how I sleep well at night, just knowing that I did enough, and that, you know, whatever was done today, we put to rest, and we got to prepare for tomorrow. But in order to prepare for tomorrow, we got to be well rested, and we got to keep a positive mindset. And it also helps to build an identity outside of journalism. You know, in recent years, I've attempted to understand myself beyond, you know, my profession. You know, what is it that I'm good at? If I wasn't a journalist, what would I do? You know, you got to take up more hobbies that don't involve journalism. You got to talk about things that don't involve the craft. You got to find friends and family that are not inside the industry, because it's its own little bubble. And when you're in that bubble, it's very easy to get caught up in all of the things that in the grand scheme of life don't really matter, you know, because journalism is mentally draining, you know, in the sense that it's also an ego-filled industry. And, you know, there are a lot of people who might not feel that they're being egotistical, but because we are in front of the camera and we have bylines, you know, some people, you know, they have a sense of ego, and it's not that ego is bad. It's just that when you always have a byline and you're in front of the camera, you know, whether it comes from inside you or outside of you, you feel an obligation to save the world, when in fact, like I said, there's only one of you. And I think that once you come to terms with that it's only you and you can only do your part, you know, it'll become less mentally draining. You know, you'll find more strength in just doing your best and leaving the rest to the higher power, whoever or whatever that is to you. And you'll be, you know, more emboldened to just find your life outside of journalism so that you're not going crazy. And trust me, I'm speaking as somebody who's been doing this for like a decade or so now, you know, and it's how I find peace. But very, very awesome question.
Yeah, I love what Sam said. Like, just, yeah, I think, you know, the biggest memory that I have about, you know, kind of being really, really mentally drained with all of this kind of advocacy work in journalism was last summer. You know, things in DC were really heating up with you know, protests in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, and it was a really kind of harrowing experience to not like be a part of that, especially as someone who is really passionate about kind of, you know, being out literally on the streets with my peers and family members on the front lines doing the advocacy work that kind of extends beyond, my laptop or my computer. And that just kind of seeing all of that happen without me was really draining. But I also want to reflect what Sam said, like you can only really do your part to make an impact. And sometimes you have to be kind of content and self-directed about what you can do and not worry about anything else to really find the piece that you can with the work that you do. So that I think definitely holds true. And it's something that I kind of try and keep in mind, throughout, even at school. There's only so much that I can do. And if at the end of the day, I'm proud of, what I've done for the day to try and kind of make things a little better, then that's okay. Like things don't have to be perfect. Things, don't have to be going, all kind of hunky-dory, perfectly swell. But if I can be content with the small, albeit small impact, like I always kind of view my work as being very kind of concentrated and focused. But if I can be content with that, if I can be content with working with a small community or just with one person to really get a story out, then I think that to me is the biggest step forward in taking pride and kind of healthy immersion in the work that you do, especially if it's kind of a high school work that you have to do to balance other things as well. But yeah, I think the other thing is, talking with your friends and, being around peers and teachers. I've been lucky enough to have two amazing teachers, Miss Merchant and Miss Levinson, who helped me run InLight magazine, but who also kind of keep me in line about the things that I know that I can't do. Like they'll, tell me, Ishaan, you're taking on too much. Like, are you sure you can do this? Like, it's great that, you can try, but, you have other things to focus on as well. And I think having people that can pull you out of kind of this, sometimes it can become like mania that you're just focusing on getting this done. Having people that can pull you out of that, ask you to step back and evaluate like, hey, maybe it's better just to rest and then come back to this tomorrow. That I think is a godsend when it comes to doing advocacy work that is challenging, especially if it's issues that you care about that are really, really close to home. Both literally and kind of on this identity aspect as well. So that's kind of one thing that I try and do just to stay positive, is talk with other people who aren't involved and teachers who can kind of see the bigger picture. And then again, kind of, taking those steps back and really, taking the time to rest and recharge is, one of the biggest things.
Yes, guys. I really appreciate everything you guys are saying. I love that you all kind of came to like a good common ground of just knowing you did enough, being content with that and letting it go. And then also how I believe Kristine, you mentioned like dialogue, like that. I feel like that's so important because if you're talking about it with others, I mean you also are still letting it free from yourself, but you're still getting it out to other people so they can know it too. Because if you just keep it all in your head, all of these experiences and stories and traumas, you can go crazy yourself just thinking about it constantly, letting it just spiral all of your thoughts out of control. And then also, Sam, you mentioned about the ego, and I feel like that was one of my biggest things of like looking at journalism, is how sometimes you can see people start taking others' experiences and stories for granted, and it only looks like they're looking for monetary gain or just like recognition through others, but they're not really getting out the real message for the person who went through it or the people that are really being affected by it. It reminded me of a column or a post about some photographers going to a town that was kind of not doing so well or poor, and they're just taking pictures of the streets and the buildings and the kids that might be playing outside, but they look dirty. And it's like, that's not how that community is. And they don't want you to just go in there and show that they're struggling to the worst possible degree ever. You can show them at the picnics that they throw for their festivals of their communities, when they do save up all of their town money to throw that, instead of just showing the struggles of people. And it's like, you're not really helping. And it's like, it looks like you're only doing this for yourself and not the people who, without them, you wouldn't have a job. You wouldn't have anything to report without them. So make sure you're giving them the best possible outcome of your work if you're going to be there to speak on them or speak about them. So I really appreciate that.
And then another thing I just wanted to touch on that was really important to me, that about just about everybody said, was that the most important thing about making sure you're okay is like community and reaching out to other people. And I feel like that's definitely an important step, because these issues do hurt us, and they might hurt us even more than we realize, because a lot of times we find ourselves to be desensitized to these kinds of things just because it happens so often in our communities. So definitely reaching out and having those conversations with your loved ones and other people in your community just about the things that happen is definitely important to making sure that you have some level of sanity. And also, there was a question from the audience, and it says, what was your most challenging journalism assignment and what made it challenging?
This might be a bit kind of obvious, but for me, it was actually the first issue we did for the Journals of Justice, mostly because at the time, I mean, I hadn't really known how to approach people and kind of talk to them about sharing their experiences, because it is something that's very vulnerable for the writer and the people publishing and the editors and everyone, because everyone has to be really aware of the story that we're trying to share, and we have to communicate with the writers. So I think the actual publication part wasn't challenging. I was really happy when it came together. The challenging part was more being able to understand how to navigate those kind of feelings and emotions that come up when sharing these important stories, mostly because at the school newspaper in journalism, I was always taught to edit, be like, okay, your grammar's wrong here, your punctuation's wrong here, like, what is the purpose of your story, like, why, like, how are you reporting this event accurately? But that's not how it goes, I guess, with the journalism we do at the JOJ, because it's a lot about stories, talking about your personal experiences, how you were affected. And I guess that's less of an analytical side, but more of like pathos and being able to like express yourself to the audience or to just yourself on a piece of paper or a Google Doc even. So I think just being able to understand like news reporting journalism versus actual like personal information journalism, I think was a really big thing.
Probably saw my face. I don't have a really good poker face, but when I heard the question, I couldn't think of a particular story. What I will say is that I think for me, it's more of like the kinds of stories involving family members of people who lost their lives. That's often, stories that I'm not going to say I don't enjoy doing them, but they're often very hard because you have to go in being mindful of other people's feelings and what they're feeling at the time. And you have a deadline, but at the very same time, people don't have a deadline when it comes to their grief, and people grieve loved ones days, months, years, decades, so when it comes to sensitive things like that, it's often a balancing act, just asking somebody for their perspective, but also being mindful of their feelings and just really humbling yourself to take their rejection of your offer. Happened to me today. I got the phone hung up on me, somebody calling somebody whose son lost his life, you just take that with the profession. But I would say that's the hardest part of the job because, you want to get the real story, but getting the real story oftentimes takes going into situations where people are very distrusting of the media or where people just don't want their feelings put out there in the first place.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think because, again, for me, it wasn't necessarily like a particular assignment or like a particular event. I think to some extent, there's an element of difficulty that just comes with journalism in general. Like I think, from my experience at least, working, regionally, but also in a community, kind of a very small, tight-knit community, there's always an element of difficulty in breaking kind of the norms of the status quo. Like nobody expects InLight to happen at Maret in a way that they expect a newspaper or a lit arts magazine to happen. Like there's always going to be pushback and there's always going to be this reluctance to accept the fact that people are interested in making these changes to a community that does really need to step into its own responsibility. So I don't know if I can pick exactly one moment, but I think, you know, our first issue was challenging. I'll kind of echo what Kristine said, like creating something new is always a difficult thing to do. But I think something that I remember a little bit more kind of vividly was kind of this past year where, you know, we were struggling to get people invested in InLight magazine during the pandemic. Like everyone is focused on their own thing. They're really kind of finding ways to thrive in a new social environment. You know, in 2020, we were all just trying to survive quarantine, but now everyone is back in 2021 and we're all kind of doing virtual school and we're just trying to make it through this, you know, environment again and thrive in a new kind of more digital environment that is completely different from what we used to have. So it was difficult to find the inspiration, the willingness to work on an issue like InLight magazine at Maret, with everyone kind of just focused on making it through the day, kind of waking up for classes at, you know, and just making it through until the end of the day. I don't think anyone really wants to spend extra time just sitting at their computer when, you know, the world is at a very difficult and in a very difficult situation with you know, cases rising and everything. But it was hard to, I think, find inspiration and motivation to keep working on a project that was, you know, that I was, again, like stretched for time for. Like I was just like my peers, we're all just trying to make it through. And I was, you know, one of those people that just was kind of struggling with this new COVID-19 reality. So with our new normal. So it was definitely a challenge to find people interested and to find the motivation to continue putting out, you know, work that wasn't really going to be viewed in person the same way that it used to be. But I think it was also a learning experience as well, like just persevering through the kinds of, you know, long-term obstacles that we face, because God knows there'll be plenty more. But I think that was one of the biggest challenges that I remember, was really that completely virtual, not really getting the opportunity to talk with peers in person about this project. It's, you know, it's a challenge in and of itself.
Thank you guys for answering that. And this conversation has been really refreshing so far. And now we have a few more specific questions for the panelists. And my question is for Sam. I wanted to know, how do you embrace the race first philosophy to others around you?
Very, very good question. So for a little bit of background, Race First was the name of a book written by Dr. Tony Martin. It was a book about the Garvey movement, pretty much. So, you know, at a time in the early 1900s where, you know, a lot of people of African descent living in the United States were, you know, fighting for rights, advancing rights, you know, integrating into the U.S. system in a sense. Marcus Garvey really espoused the philosophy where, you know, Black people were encouraged to, you know, do for self in terms of establishing their own businesses, establishing their own neighborhoods. It's been done before. You know, you have Tulsa, Oklahoma. You have a lot of cities across the United States where Black people thrived economically. But that race first philosophy was something that was taken global, you know, and just identifying not only with each other in the United States, but all over the world, and recognizing that we had a common heritage, but also a common struggle, so to speak, you know, one that sort of goes on to this day where we are not totally comfortable with doing for ourselves and acting in our best interest. You know, a lot of us still identify with the nations that have, you know, done a lot of bad things to us instead of identifying with who we are as African people. So when I say race first, you know, I'm speaking about me as a journalist, recognizing my ethnic and my socioeconomic background, and really using that as an impetus for my writings. You know, it's no different than anybody of any other cultural background, you know, doing what they do for their affinity group. And for too long, people of African descent have been discouraged for acting exclusively, you know, for, you know, their people. And, you know, having that philosophy is often conflated with racism, when in fact, racism is a system, you know. And I would like to live in a world where one day people of various races and ethnicities are able to coexist, while at the same time, each race and ethnic group is encouraged to do for themselves, you know, to live among their own people, to espouse their identity proudly, because it doesn't have to be that way where you as an ethnic group are, you know, espousing your identity and trampling on the rights of another group. You know, African people have never been that way. We've been loving people while at the same time being proud of our heritage. So when I talk about race first, I'm talking about celebrating Blackness, and I'm talking about propelling Blackness to this, you know, to the extent that Black people are proud to be African and are proud to do what it is that they're doing within their ethnic group.
I really appreciate that, because I feel like it's very important to uplift ourselves before we can even uplift others. We need to heal ourselves before we can heal others. And I really like what you said about what was it? Of how like you want us to live in where we can all coexist. And I always think of it more so as a tossed salad than a melting pot, because you still want to be yourself and be able to get with other cultures, learn about them, and still be yourself, instead of like with melting pot, it feels too much that you're losing yourself a little bit. When you melt some things together, melting takes away the taste of everything. But a nice little tossed salad, some nice dressings, all these different components make something beautiful. So I really appreciate that answer.
Exactly. And just one more thing. I don't want to take too much time, but tossed salad, they were saying that when I was coming up in school, because the whole melting pot idea, that's a byproduct of American exceptionalism, where they overlook the stories of how enslaved Africans and indigenous people were brought over here and made to work. You know, they often overlook that when they talk about American exceptionalism, you know. So the whole tossed salad paradigm is a response to that, by helping people understand that we have various experiences and they all need to be respected, you know, if America is to truly move forward and reflect what the document says. That document being the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, no, I really like that metaphor. I don't know, it really just stuck with me. I'm definitely gonna hold on to that. My first question is for Ishaan. I was wondering how you balance the demanding work that comes with working on a magazine along with school and any other extracurriculars you may participate in.
Yeah, that's a great question that I also ask myself quite regularly as a student. So a few weeks ago, I was lucky enough to attend one of the kind of Princeton Prize community events, where we were just celebrating people in DC who have you know been recognized by the council, and we were lucky enough to hear from Councilwoman Henderson, who is you know a phenomenal speaker, and she's just so passionate about like both race relations and kind of serving her community, just always being in service. And one thing that she said really that resonated with me, as someone who kind of has their hands in multiple different things, like doing debate and kind of playing tennis and running cross country and all of these other crazy things, is to really kind of, when you've got a bunch of components in the air, when you're juggling a lot of things, the most valuable thing that you can do at the end of the day is know which things that you can kind of drop, let fall to the ground, and then pick up again when you're ready to, or the next day when maybe you're kind of more adept at keeping everything in the air. And that's kind of something that I try and keep in mind when I balance all of the different commitments of, being a junior and taking APs at the end of the year, while also balancing, debate and all of this fun stuff that I love to do with, my friends and family, is to understand that, yeah, there are some things that I can let go of, that I can kind of let bounce to the ground, but there are also things that I can pick up again when I, have the capacity, when I'm kind of operating at 100% again, because sometimes it feels like, maybe I'm running on empty. But that's one thing that I always try and do. So if I'm scheduling myself too much, if I'm filling my calendar with obligations, sometimes I just take a look at everything and being, hey, is there something that I can push until tomorrow? Is there something that I can kind of let slide for today, that I can let slide? And often that comes in the form of another extracurricular, like maybe it's not going to this debate tournament, maybe it's instead kind of working hard to finish a chemistry assignment. But at the end of the day, I think it's really, self-reflection and kind of self-assessment really propels me to kind of be more cognizant about what I'm balancing, and less so on like how I balance it, just to really kind of figure out, what are the priorities that I can take with me from today into tomorrow, but also that also forces me to think about like my obligation to other people. So I think, yeah, that's the biggest piece of advice that I always keep in mind when balancing things. It's not always a perfect science, as I'm sure many people know, but it gets easier when you have the willingness to be content with not getting everything done all the time. And for someone like me, that's kind of a hard thing to do, because I like to keep everything on a very strict schedule with everything kind of perfectly in its place. But slowly I'm kind of learning that that's not always realistic. So I always try and kind of keep in mind that there are things that I can push to other people, or that I can ask for help with, or that I can just let go and wait until I have, when I'm not running on empty or when I'm kind of out of energy to do. That way I can kind of give 100% to something when it really needs it. But yeah, that's kind of the biggest thing that I only recently learned as things kind of did get super, super busy. So yeah, I think that's the one major thing.
Thank you for that. And also we have one more question for Kristine. We want to know, what do you find refreshing about the perspective young people bring to the issues that they're facing in their communities?
I think a lot of times, I'm going to preface my answer by saying this. I feel like a lot of times young people and just youth in general, they're kind of scared to express their opinions because they don't think that it's as valued as what adults have to say. I do not agree with that. I believe that all of us have something that we deserve to say, and we have a story to share. And I guess part of being able to keep new youth voices engaged and making sure that everyone has a chance and a platform to share their story is being able to tell them that it's okay, like even if your story to you seems incomplete or like you're not finished with that journey, that's okay. Because part of sharing your story is being able to connect with others and kind of move forward on your journey together. So I think that youth bring a really fresh perspective to, I guess, current events and just social justice in general, because a lot of times I feel like we're at the forefront of the movement. I know that a lot of my friends and I were very involved in protests, and especially in the digital age of social media and blog posts and platforms and just every single communication technology you can think of. All of us are very aware of the issues at hand. But I think that also part of the problem is kind of like what we touched upon today, that it kind of gets overwhelming. So I do understand that we have to be able to create these platforms for youth, but also be able to kind of complement that with like self-care and advocacy and just like really making sure that we take care of ourselves. So yeah, I feel like youth bring a really fresh perspective, and because they are a part of the movement and on the front lines, and they're not just observers.
Yes, I agree with you. I love when the young people know that, like, from adults saying, like, oh, you can't talk about this. Yes, we can, because we know about it. It's becoming our life. We're the new generation who have to live in it, so we should have the voice to speak about it.
I just want to say thank you to everybody just for like all these things you've been saying. And I'm looking at the time now, and I think it's about time to start wrapping up the discussion for today. And again, thank you for the invigorating and captivating conversation. I really feel that I learned a lot today. And I'm going to keep everything that you said close to me. And I also want to thank the audience for joining in and listening to the conversation, the questions that you guys left. And I hope those of you watching also learned a lot and everything resonated with you just as much as it did with me. And lastly, I just want to thank my fellow co-host, Kayla, for helping keep the conversation flowing and asking such thought-provoking questions.
Thank you, Zakia. I also enjoyed this very stimulating conversation. I took a lot out of what was said, and I can't wait to apply it to myself. I also appreciate the panelists for joining us today, and I hope to hear more from you and your work in the future.
Are there any last words of advice the panel wants to offer to the viewers who are interested in pursuing a career in journalism?
I mean, I would just say, just get out there and do it. Just write. I think it's important. I'll have a story to share. Just, even if right now you're at home, just pick up a Google document, research a bit about an issue that you're passionate about, and just start thinking about it and understand your role in the movement and what you can do to engage others.
I want to keep it very brief. I got a couple words of advice. One, I would say read and write often, especially news articles, anything, read prose, anything where you can soak in the wordplay that's being used and just try to not mimic it, but, execute it in your own writing. What I would also say is just in terms of journalism, augment your skills in addition to writing, video editing. Think about the business of the craft. There are a lot of skills that are transferable within journalism, and it doesn't just stop at writing and like editing. Really think about what things you're interested in and what skills you have that you can use as you continue to be a journalist that can help you, become a bigger brand, so to speak, and also to write deeply about certain niche topics.
Yeah, just to I agree with all of that. I think those are all wonderful pieces of advice. One other thing that I think I'll add is be persistent. One of my favorite English teachers that I know says have a nose for news. Be on the lookout for things that you can, talk about, that you can express, that you can engage with, in order to, be again, more conscious about the issues that, are affecting you and your community. But be persistent. Don't give up. And if there's a story that you want to share, if there's an idea that you want to express, an issue that you're passionate about, don't take no for an answer. If someone's telling you that story doesn't belong here, find another place for it, because everyone has an important story to tell. The myth is that there are stories that are more important than others. So be persistent and always be on the lookout for that story that you feel passionate about sharing. And hopefully that will kickstart, anything that you're interested in doing in journalism or in just writing in general. But yeah, thank you to the hosts and the wonderful panelists.
Thank you guys for those words of encouragement to our audience. And I just want to say thank you all again in general for attending this panel. This has been a wonderful evening, and our Summer Speaker Series event for the day has officially come to a close. Goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.